Half of young Canadian women say they're putting off kids because they can't afford them. But Mark Carney wants 100 million people, not for families, for the machine. No homes, no hope, and no future. Just growth at any cost. Not to build Canada, but to change it.
I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. We have a great episode for you today. So on Friday, we heard news from Mark Carney's campaign that he was pausing his campaign. So the legacy media and the Liberal campaign said this: Prime Minister Mark Carney is pausing his federal election campaign for a third time to tackle U.S. President Donald Trump's escalating global trade war. I am going to tell you why this is not true, why the Liberal campaign is lying to us. Mark Carney is not being honest with Canadians, as has become his pattern, and as has also become the pattern, the legacy media is covering for all of them. First, I'm going to just please ask you to like this video. It really helps us with the algorithm. It helps more Canadians see the show and find out the truth. So please just help us by hitting that like button. Really, really helps us out. Okay, so why is this not true? Yes, U.S. President Donald Trump came out and announced tariffs, and then he put a pause on tariffs, but not all tariffs. Canadians will still be hit with some tariffs, and China will still be hit with some tariffs. Why does Mark Carney have to take time off the campaign to do that? Well, CTV said it in their own headline: no new actions announced as Carney pauses his campaign. Right? So he's not doing anything. He's saying that he's pausing the campaign because he has to be the super serious prime minister dealing with President Trump. That is, after all, why Liberals have gained support in the polls. Canadians seem to trust Mark Carney mostly because of his resume, and they think that he's the one that can handle Donald Trump. He's caught that moment, and some Canadians are sort of fixated on this idea that Carney is the one that can deal with Trump. And so Carney's playing that up, and he's saying that he can't be campaigning. The real reason, though, we all know the real reason why Mark Carney has put a lid on his campaign, and that is because he is particularly bad at this. He is proving himself to be a very bad candidate. He doesn't really like going out to events. He's not very good at interacting with Canadians. Every time we see him out on the campaign trail, he looks awkward. He looks very stiff. He looks very uncomfortable. This is a man who hasn't spent a lot of time in Canada during his adult life, right? He grew up in Canada, grew up in Edmonton, then went off to Harvard and Oxford. The only time he really spent in Canada during his adult life was when he was the governor of the Bank of Canada. So not exactly rubbing elbows with the working class out there. He was really already in his ivory tower, and then he's gone. He's just not very comfortable in the campaign, and he particularly does not like the press. Okay, the Liberal press in Canada is so pro-Liberal Party and so pro-Mark Carney. I mean, not only are they ideologically arm in arm, like side by side, they believe the same thing, they promote the same thing, they have the same ideals for Canada. Add a layer on top of that the Liberal government actually funds the media in Canada through a series of newspaper bailouts, of different tax incentives, of different journalism funds that get divvied out to the journalists. Plus, the CBC gets their $1.2 billion. Mark Carney has promised an additional $150 million on top of that. So the media is perfectly primed to support Mark Carney, and yet he still can't do it. He hates answering questions. He hates being pestered. He particularly hasn't come up with a good response to his connection with China. Why is the Chinese government out there promoting Mark Carney on WeChat? That's a pretty good question. That's a question that the Prime Minister should be able to answer. Of course, he hasn't been able to answer that. And his default response is just really quite pathetic. So the Globe and Mail reported that Mark Carney was pictured and rubbing elbows and meeting secretly with a bunch of different pro-Beijing groups. Look at this Globe and Mail headline, though. It is so soft. It doesn't even mention Mark Carney in the headline. It just says, Liberal candidate Peter Yuan chosen to replace Paul Chiang linked to pro-Beijing groups. Okay, so we went through this on the show with Sam Cooper last week, but the guy that wanted to turn in the Conservative to a bounty to the communist regime, he was replaced in Union Markham-Ville by an even more radical pro-China candidate. We had that video of him singing a Chinese national anthem wearing Canadian police regalia. So anyway, that's what the headline is about in this Globe and Mail article. You have to scroll all the way down to get to the part where it talks about Mark Carney, who is actually also meeting with extreme groups. So here's how it reads. During the Liberal leadership race, Mr. Carney met with the executives of the JCCC, according to its website, which described the former central banker's entry into politics as an important turning point in upgrading Canada-Chinese relations. Well, this is what Mark Carney had to say when asked about this on Thursday in reference to this Globe and Mail report.
My colleagues have a story today about a Liberal candidate's relations with China-friendly groups and a meeting that you also held with a pro-Beijing group. So my question is, why did you meet with this pro-Beijing group, Jiangsu Commerce Council of Canada? And is the party okay with the fact that Liberal candidate Peter Yan has been so close with the Chinese consulate and China-friendly groups, given the public inquiry into foreign interference, says that this is a tactic China uses to exert influence?
Okay, well, I'm sorry, but you can't believe everything you read in the Globe and Mail. So in your question, and I guess in the article in question, you said I had a meeting with whatever your term was, Beijing group. I've never heard of this group, okay? Never heard of this group. Certainly didn't have a set-up meeting with this group. Full stop. So check your sources before you write things like that, okay? Or your colleagues do.
So a lot of libs on social media are like cheering on Mark Carney, saying, look at him smack down these fake news reporters. Guys, the Globe and Mail is on your side. The Globe and Mail is basically pro-liberal propaganda at this point, and they want to support you. They're just trying to clarify Mark Carney being smug and smacking down reporters. He's just, again, not very good at this. And the problem is that there are always we're bringing receipts here, man. Okay, Mark Carney, you're saying that you've never met with this group and you've never met with its leaders. Well, I'm sorry. Here is a picture that was circulating online on Friday of Mark Carney with the leaders of this group, all of them. This is the president. These are the people in the group he met during a high-profile Lunar New Year event in Toronto this year, 2025. So the picture exists, right? This isn't just, these people just show up for a photo after a campaign event, right? Mark Carney is clearly at their event. They're all there, the entire senior leadership of this group. So just because he hasn't heard of the group, fine. Maybe he just doesn't know all the names of all the groups, but he obviously met with them. He's obviously tightly aligned and closely aligned with the Chinese and their arm in Canada. They have active agents working in Canada, and Mark Carney's arm with them. And obviously, this is the real reason why the Liberals have basically put a lid on Mark Carney. They're saying, you know what, we've kind of already got this election in the bag. We captured this moment. Canadians believe that Mark Carney is the one that can deal with Trump. So all that we really need to do is have it in the news that Mark Carney's out there rolling up his sleeves, figuring out a plan on how to deal with Donald Trump, and then hide him, right? This is like Joe Biden 2020 U.S. election. Just put the old man in the basement, keep him away from reporters, keep him away from the press, keep him away from photographers. We just don't want anyone to see him. And we'll ride out the clock. There's only 2 weeks left in this election. Ride out the clock, and hopefully Canadians will continue to support him. Here is Pierre Poilievre calling out the truth that the Liberals are just hiding from the media so that they can avoid accountability and scrutiny for what Pierre Poilievre calls the lost Liberal decade and Mark Carney's conflicts of interest. Let's play that clip.
Mark Carney is hiding again today in the middle of the election campaign he called so that you can forget that the lost Liberal decade drove the cost of housing and food up and drove your wages and living standards down. The crime and chaos are overtaking our once safe streets. He wants you to forget that Liberal insiders like him have profited richly off of the misery of everyone else. That while Canadians were suffering, he and Liberal insiders were getting rich. They were benefiting off of the suffering. This is because of very powerful conflicts of interest that remain in place today and which Mr. Carney refuses to answer for.
And speaking of things that Mark Carney refuses to answer for, we've got another one. The story came up on Monday morning. So Brian Lilly wrote this on X. He wrote a column last week saying basically it's not clear where Mark Carney has been living for the last few years. We don't know where he's paying his taxes. So let me just read his thread on X here. He says, last week I wrote a column saying Mark Carney was less than clear about where he pays his personal taxes. CTV picked up on the story this weekend, and Carney is still less than clear. I'll explain why this matters. Read the next tweet here. It says, this is the simple question I sent to Carney's team. Hello, given the accusation and claims by Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, could the campaign please inform me where Mr. Carney has filed his personal income taxes for the following years, 2020, 21, 22, 23, and 24? Lilly goes on. He says, we all pay taxes based on where we live or earn our incomes. In 2020, Carney spent part of the year working in the UK as bank governor, and presumably and understandably would have filed in the UK and Canada if he returned in Canada for the second half of the year. What about the rest of those years? Where did Mark Carney pay his personal income taxes? This wasn't about how much he earned, but just where. So he says this. Here is the response Carney's team sent after a day of pondering. Quote, Mark Carney has followed all the rules as a tax-paying resident of Canada, including while filing returns in the years you mentioned, said campaign spokesman Mohammed Hussein. You can follow the rules and still not pay your income tax in Canada if you are paying income tax in another country that has a tax treaty like the UK, Ireland, or the US. Now that CTV has picked up on the story, Carney still isn't being clear. Mixed tenses muddles it. And so this is what CTV was reporting, this graphic here. Mark Carney pays income taxes in Canada and has always followed all the rules as a tax-paying resident of Canada. You get that? Mark Carney pays income taxes in Canada. Okay, so currently he does, right? In 2025, he became the prime minister. He got a new job, prime minister of Canada. Presumably, he pays taxes on that income. That's present tense, right? He pays income taxes today in Canada, but that's not what the question is. The question is, where did you pay taxes for the last 4 years? Why does this matter? Because we don't even know where Mark Carney lives. We don't know where he lived between 2020 and 2025. When did he move back to Canada? On which date did he officially become a Canadian resident for the purpose of taxes? Was it the day he became prime minister? Was that the day that he officially brought his residency back to Canada? Don't you think Canadians deserve to know this question? Don't you think that that is something pretty straightforward? Norman Spector followed it up, just saying, this is the question. In what years was Carney a resident of Canada, and in what years was he a non-resident for tax purposes? Wouldn't we all love to know? Well, unfortunately, Mark Carney's just busy. He's busy. He's off dealing with Donald Trump, so we're told, and so he's not actually able to campaign. How pathetic. We have a prime minister that can't answer a basic question. When did you become a resident of Canada for tax purposes? I can't wait for the debate, folks. This is why the debate is going to be so good. Wednesday, the French debate. Thursday, the English debate, both in Montreal. And Pierre Poilievre will ask this question. We know Pierre Poilievre will ask this question, and Canadians may finally get to hear the truth. Let's put it to Mark Carney. Make him answer that very, very simple question. I think Canadians deserve to know. And let me tell you why I think the Liberal campaign is just an absolute dumpster fire. It is falling apart. So not only did they have to pull Carney off the campaign, not only can they not answer questions about pro-China groups, not only can they not answer questions about where he pays taxes, well, the Liberals had to resort to these tricks, okay? Basically lying to Canadians and trying to set up Conservatives. This is what Liberals do best. This is the CBC reporting. Wow. Liberal operatives planted stop the steal buttons at the Conservative conference. These images were making the rounds. So it was Liberals, and they admitted it, and they were bragging about it out at a bar, and a journalist overheard them bragging about the fact that they are trying to manipulate Canadians, that they are trying to trick Canadians using these tricks, using these cheap tricks to try to convince Canadians of something that's not true. So there was a Conservative conference in Ottawa over the weekend. I was actually supposed to speak at it, but I was feeling so sick. I had lost my voice, as you might have heard on the podcast last week, and my baby was sick. And so I just couldn't justify getting on an airplane. Didn't want to get others sick, and I wanted to prioritize my own health and taking care of my baby. So I didn't go to this conference anyways. Just so silly, right? They put Stop the Steal, which was a reference to the American campaign against what happened, the shenanigans in 2020. And so that Stop the Steal slogan is supposed to be like a pro-Trump campaign slogan. And what the Liberal operatives are trying to do is make the Conservatives in Canada seem Trumpy, seem Trumpian so that they can point to Pierre Poilievre and say, look, he's just like Trump. Look at his followers. They're just like Trump supporters. Pathetic, guys. And then the fact that this has all come out now, this is how the National Post was reporting it. Spread of fake campaign pins, disgusting, says senior Tory. It is so ironic that the Liberals try to say that they are the ones defending our democracy, that they're trying to snuff out misinformation and disinformation online. Meanwhile, they're spreading misinformation about the Conservatives, physically trying to spread misinformation. And then they're also spreading the disinformation. These are words that they came up with that don't really mean anything. But misinformation is just something that's a lie, that's fake. Disinformation is when it's an adversarial foreign government that is pushing that fake information, which is also happening, which the Chinese government is out there. CSIS put out that report last week saying that that is true. Okay, I want to cover this story really quickly. Larry Brock, who is a Conservative MP, posted this on X. This document was found in a prison by a correctional officer aimed at turning inmates against Conservatives. Are the Liberals really trying to win votes from convicted criminals by attacking Conservative crime policies? I'll answer that question for you, Larry. Yes, of course they are. Of course they are. What a joke. The fact that criminals in prisons get to vote in Canada is absurd on its face to begin with. If you have broken the law and you are in jail serving a debt to society, you shouldn't get the privilege of voting. I'll just say it. And the fact that the Liberals are actually out there trying to campaign to those criminals by saying, look, the Conservatives want to be tough on crime. Vote for the Liberals because we'll make your life easier. We'll put you first, guys. We'll put the criminals ahead of the Canadians, ahead of your victims. We'll help you out. Those mean Conservatives want to crack down on crime. Vote for the Liberals. What a joke. This is just so disreputable, folks. If you're voting Liberal out there, just keep this in mind. You're voting for the same party that the criminals are voting for, okay? You're voting for the same party that they are out there actively campaigning in prisons after a decade of liberal, soft on crime laws, coddling criminals and unleashing chaos into our community, says Larry Brock. Yes, 100%. What an absolute joke. Okay, what else from Mark Carney? Juno News reported this over the weekend. Mark Carney has a renewed push for online censorship. This is what he had to say last week before they put the lid on the campaign, that yes, he's going to be out there. If you thought that the Online News Act and the terrible censorship laws of Justin Trudeau were dead with the last session of Parliament, think again. If Mark Carney forms government, they will act, he says. Let's play that clip.
Large American online platforms have become seas of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate in all its forms. And they're being used by criminals to harm our children. My government will act. And today we're announcing our plan to fight crime, to protect Canadians, and to build communities that are safe, secure, and strong. A plan to make Canada secure, to make Canada strong.
And so speaking of online censorship, what we've seen in Canada will just continue under Mark Carney. So over the weekend, we saw a riot, basically, a huge pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist rally that devolved into violence and chaos, as they tend to do in Montreal. And what do the police do? Well, they arrest the journalist, okay? So this is what happens when you have a censorship regime in Ottawa pushing this kind of thing. The word gets down to rank and file. And I know police are just doing their job. Sometimes it's easier to arrest the person who is different than the crowd. You can't arrest all of these thugs in the crowd. So you just arrest the person who is, I don't know, the center of the chaos. In this case, it is a journalist. Her name is Natasha Graham, an independent reporter. And here you can see her basically being assaulted and arrested by the police. This is all reported by the Rebels, Alexa Lavoie. Unbelievable scenes out there. And then those sick, twisted Hamas supporters are cheering, okay? So they're out there supporting a terrorist cult. And then on top of that, they are cheering the arrest of a journalist. Just to tell you their mindset there, this is what will continue under Mark Carney. On a related note, Mario Zlea, who's a guest of the show last week and a friend of the show, he did a TikTok video about our reporting at True North and Juno News. So Mario reported that when you try to search for, remember that report that we put out a few weeks ago about how Mark Carney transed his own daughter at the Tavistock Clinic, a discredited trans ideology hospital in the UK that pushed young children into medical transitions. Well, Mark Carney's daughter is 24, and she's a radical trans activist who goes by they, them, and she herself admitted to receiving treatment at this discredited Tavistock clinic. Mario was reporting on this. Mario was talking about our story, and he was saying that when you Google the headline of the story, it doesn't show up. So Google is suppressing our story. Mario did a TikTok just revealing that that was happening. And what happened? Well, TikTok removed it. He goes, unreal. The video I posted yesterday talking about how Mark Carney's daughter influencing his public policy decision on trans and gender spending got taken down on TikTok. I got another strike. Absolutely nothing in the video violated community guidelines, and I was respectful. You can see video was removed. Well, he posted it on Instagram, so you can still see it. And just in case you're wondering who Mario Zelaya is, he is an incredibly influential, basically, I call him like an independent reporter, a content creator focused on Canadian news. Look at his reach. He says, Liberal Party of Canada, I am your reckoning. TikTok, this is how many views he's had just so far this year. 110 million views on TikTok. 54 million views on Instagram, another 28.6 million on X. And what is he doing? He's just telling Canadians the truth and exposing the Liberals for who they are. And yet he is being censored because they have this power. They have this power. And of course, Mark Carney will continue to push that. Well, at a press conference in Calgary, Mark Carney doubled down on this radical ideology when it comes to trans and children. Not only did he say that he'll continue to support it, but he actually wants to force Alberta to continue to undergo these monstrous surgeries and chemical castrations that happen to confused little children. He says that he will be the defender of that. This is so extreme, folks. This is like radical woke ideology. This is what Americans rejected, by the way, in the last election. I think that a major reason why Donald Trump won the election was because of this issue. Conservatives in Canada are too afraid to touch it and won't campaign on it, which is a shame. But here's Mark Carney just reminding you how he has the most extreme position possible to take. Let's play that clip.
Mr. Carney, your platform hasn't said anything about LGBTQ Canadians. We're here in Alberta where the province wants to restrict healthcare for transgender people, and they want the Canada Health Act to defend their access to gender-affirming care. Would you do that? And what is your party going to do about the backsliding that we're seeing for gender and sexual minorities?
Thank you for the question, Dylan. Let me start at a fundamental point, which is, our Canada is a mosaic. We are all Canadians, but we all have different identities and distinctions. And one of the great strengths of this country is recognizing that people can be who they are, they can love who they love, they can live where they want to live. And it's fundamentally important that the federal government is the defender of those rights, defender of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And access to healthcare in Canada is not a business, it is a fundamental right, and we will defend it.
So that's the kind of thing that sounds great to the ears of Liberal Canadians, that he's going to defend the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. He's going to make sure that healthcare is delivered to all, until you realize what he's talking about, right? He's not talking about healthcare. He's talking about experimental drugs on children, pushing sex change operations onto children. It is absolutely unbelievable, and he gets away with it, right? Because the media is too afraid to talk about it. They say this topic is off limits. Conservatives are too afraid to talk about it. They say this is off limits. This is not our focus. We're going to focus only on economic issues. And meanwhile, the Liberals get away with the most extreme positions possible. Well, one person who doesn't let Mark Carney get away with this is Dr. Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson put out an absolute masterclass of a video where he just eviscerates Mark Carney. He posted it on YouTube over the weekend. It's worth the watch. It's a little over, I think it's an hour and a half. And he basically focuses on Mark Carney's book Values. And he talks about how the values that he lists in this book are not Canadian values. They are leftist, utopian, environmentalist values that are very different than Canada's tradition of Western liberal democracy. So just a few of the highlights here. First, he talks about how Mark Carney, when it comes to his policies and what he has championed, and that impressive resume that he does have, what has it been based on over the past 20 years? He says that Mark Carney has got absolutely everything wrong. Let's play that clip.
Either he was completely wrong about everything for the last 20 years in the worst direction possible and has learned, or that he hasn't learned a damn thing and is still sticking to exactly what he wrote in his book Values in 2021 and exactly what he's indicated in all of his public pronouncements. And he's going to act as if he's in favor of Canadian economic development, but he's going to keep pursuing a net zero agenda because that's priority number one. And you peasants are too stupid to understand the reality of the situation that's in front of you.
Next, he goes on to say that he hasn't come clean with Canadians. This is such an important point, right? Because just because he walked away from the carbon tax because it's politically unpopular right now, doesn't mean that he's changed his ideological view or that he's changed his stripes, right? He still believes in net zero. That has been the basis of his entire career. So he needs to be honest with Canadians about what his aim is, what his goals are, what his government will be based on. Let's play that clip.
He hasn't come clean to Canadians with regards to his true aim. It's like, is he a net zero advocate by 2050 or not? Well, we want to build Canada into an industrial powerhouse. It's like, which is it, buddy? Because you're not going to do both. You're not going to crisscross Canada with fossil fuel pipelines while aiming at net zero by 2050. You're not going to do that. And so you were either wrong and so wrong that it's a miracle, or you're deceiving Canadians because you think the emergency justifies it. That's the stark reality of the situation.
So, of course, the unfortunate thing about Dr. Peterson's video is it's kind of too little too late. Like, the election is almost over at this point. And anybody who really believes in Mark Carney, the people who probably should watch this video to find out more about him, they're already sold on the idea. They're not going to watch this Jordan Peterson video, which is unfortunate. But he does make this important point, which is that Mark Carney's like, he's the opposite of Justin Trudeau in that Justin Trudeau is very superficial. He lived on platitudes. He didn't really understand always what he was doing. Mark Carney's the opposite. He's a technocrat. He is one of the experts that Justin Trudeau would always want to defer to, but he's exactly the wrong kind of expert. And because he has all this expertise, he's the kind of person who believes that he can live your life better than you. He can make decisions on your behalf better than you. And like I said at the top, the things that he believes, the values that he holds are not Canadian values. He purports them to be Canadian and he says these are Canadian values. And that's what his book is all about. But his values are not Canadian. They're environmentalist, they're leftist, and they're based on this utopian idea that Canada can like perfect human nature and that we're like a superior leftist progressive version of the United States, which is just not true. The United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, all these countries are based on the same core tenets of Western liberal democracy that Jordan Peterson says that we need to work harder to promote and not try to erase Canadian history, Canadian values, and rewrite some new ideal utopia that is the wrong way to go. So I do really appreciate what Dr. Peterson is doing. He did a fantastic job. Like I said, he completely eviscerated Mark Carney. Mark Carney has no business being where he is being. He is a wolf in sheep's clothing. The sooner Canadians realize that, the better. I fear that it might be too late, that we are so close to an election here, that so many Canadians have made up their minds that we are now looking at another 4 years of Liberal government. Mark Carney, 4 years. I don't know what Canada will look like at the end of it, but it may be an absolute disaster. Hence why Jordan Peterson said the imminent Liberal victory. So sad. All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. Thank you and God bless.